First presidency of the Donald Trump. Trump was inaugurated on January 20, 2017. The day after his inauguration, an estimated 2.6 million people worldwide, including 500,000 in Washington, D.C., protested against him in the women's marches. During his first 2 weeks in office, Trump signed 18 executive orders, including authorizing procedures for repealing the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, calling as the Obamacare, withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, advancement of the Keystone XL and the Dakota Access Pipeline projects, and planning for a wall along the US border with Mexico are in a high. Conflicts of interest. Trump continued to profit from his businesses during his first presidency and knew how his administration's policies affected them. Although he said he would abandon new foreign deals, the Trump organization pursued operational expansions in Scotland, Dubai, and the Dominican Republic. Same time, the power brokers, foreign government officials, and Trump donors and allies generated hundreds of millions of dollars for his resorts and the hotels. Domestic policies. Trump took office at the height of the longest economic expansion in American history, which began in 2009 and continued until February of 2020. When the COVID-19 recession began in December 2017, he signed the Tax Cuts and Job Acts of 2017, which reduced tax rates for businesses and individuals and eliminated the penalty associated with the Affordable Care Act's individual mandate. Under Trump, the federal budget shortage increased by almost 50% to nearly $1 trillion in 2019. By the end of his term, the US national debt increased by 39%, reaching $27.75 trillion. Trump rejects the scientific accord on climate change. He reduced the budget for renewable energy research by 40% and reversed Obama-era policies directed at limiting the climate change. Same time, he withdrew from Paris Agreement, making the US only nation to not ratify it. Trump aimed to boost the production and exports of fossil fuels. Natural gas expanded under Trump, but coal continued to decline. He rolled back more than 100 federal environmental regulations, including those greenhouse gas emissions, air and water pollution, and the use of toxic substances. He weakened protections for animals and environmental standards for federal infrastructure projects, and expanded permitted areas for drilling and resource extraction, such as allowing drilling in the Arctic Refuge. Trump dismantled federal regulations on health, labor, environment, and other areas, including a bill that revoked the Obama-era regulation restricting the sale of firearms to severely mentally ill people. During his first 6 weeks in office, he delayed, suspended, or reversed 90 federal regulations, often after request by the regulated industries. Trump vowed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. He scaled back the act's implementation through executive orders. He expressed a desire to let Obamacare fail. His administration cut in half the enrollment period and drastically reduced funding for enrollment promotion. In response to the opioid epidemic, Trump signed legislation in 2018 to increase funding for drug treatments, but it was widely criticized for failing to make a concrete strategy. He barred organizations that provide abortions or abortion referrals from receiving federal funds. His administration rolled back key components of the Obama administration's workplace protections against discrimination of LGBTQ people. His attempted rollback of anti-discrimination protections for transgender patients in August 2020 was halted by a federal judge after a Supreme Court ruling extended employees' civil rights protections to gender identity and the sexual orientation. His administration took an anti-marijuana position, revoking Obama-era policies that provided protections for states that legalized marijuana. Trump is a long-time advocate of capital punishment, and his administration oversaw the federal government execute 13 prisoners, pardons, and commutations. During his first term, Trump granted 237 requests for clemency, fewer than all presidents since 1900, with the exception of George H.W. Bush and the George W. Bush. Only 25 of them had been vetted by the Justice Department's Office of the Pardons Attorney. The others were granted to people with personal or political connections to him, his family, and his allies, or recommended by celebrities. In his last full day in office, he granted 37 pardons and commuted 70 to the sentences. The pardons of 3 military service members were charged with the violent crimes were opposed by military leaders. Immigration. As president, Trump described illegal immigration as an invasion of the United States and drastically escalated immigration enforcement. He implemented harsh policies against asylum seekers and deployed nearly 6,000 troops to the Mexico-US border to stop illegal crossings. Trump also increased restrictions on granting permanent residency to immigrants needing public benefits. One of his central campaign promises was to build a wall along the border. During his first term, the US built 73 miles of wall in areas without barriers and 365 miles to replace older barriers. In 2018, Trump's refusal to sign any spending bill unless it allocated funding for the border wall resulted in the longest ever federal government shutdown for 35 days from December 2018 to January 2019. The shutdown ended after they agreed to fund the government without any funds for the wall. To avoid another shutdown, Congress passed a funding bill with $1.4 billion for border fencing in February. Trump later declared a national emergency on the southern border to divert $6.1 billion of funding to the border wall despite the congressional disagreement. In January 2017, Trump signed an executive order that denied entry to citizens from 6 Muslim majority countries for 4 months and from Syria indefinitely. The order caused many protests and legal challenges that resulted in nationwide injunctions. A revised order giving some exceptions was also blocked by courts. But the Supreme Court ruled in June that the ban could be enforced on those lacking a bona fide relationship with a person or entity. In the US, Trump replaced the ban in September with a presidential proclamation extending travel bans to Northern Koreans, Chadians, and some Venezuelan officials, but excluded Iraq and the Sudan. The Supreme Court allowed that version to go into effect in December 2017 and ultimately upheld in the ban in 2019. From 2017 to 2018, the Trump administration had a policy of family separation that separated over 4,400 children from migrant parents at the Mexico-US border. The unprecedented policies sparked public outrage in the country, despite Trump initially blaming Democrats and insisting he could not stop the policy with an executive order. He acceded to public pressure in June 2018 and mandated that illegal immigrant families be detained together unless there is a concern of risk for the child. A judge later ordered that the families be reunited and further separations stop except in limited circumstances, though over 1,000 additional children were separated from their families after the order. By April 2024, 1,360 children had not been confirmed as reunified with their families. Foreign policies. Trump describes himself as a nationalist and his foreign policy as America First. He supported populist, neo-nationalist, and authoritarian governments. Unpredictability, uncertainty, and inconsistency characterized foreign relations during his tenure. He criticized NATO allies and privately suggested that the US should withdraw from NATO. Trump began a trade war with China in 2018 after imposing tariffs and other trade barriers he said would force China to end long-standing unfair trade practice and intellectual property violation. Trump weakened the toughest US sanctions imposed after the 2014 Russian annexation of Crimea. Trump praised and, according to some critics, rarely criticized Russian President Vladimir Putin. Though he opposed some actions of Russia's government, he withdrew the US from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty, citing alleged Russian non-compliance, and supported Russia's possible return to the G7 summit. As North Korea's nuclear weapons were increasingly seen as a serious threat, Trump became the first sitting US president to meet a North Korean leader, meeting Kim Jong-un 3 times between June 2018 and June 2019. Talks on North Korean denuclearization broke down in October 2019 and no agreement was reached. By the end of Trump's first year in office, 34% of his original staff had resigned, been fired, or been reassigned. By July 2018, 61% of his senior aides had left and 141 staffs had left in the previous year. Both figures set a record for recent presidents. Various close personal aides to Trump stopped working for him or were forced to leave. Cause of Trump publicly disparaged several of his former top officials. Trump was impeached twice by the House of Representatives. Though acquitted by the Senate on both occasions, the first impeachment arose from a whistleblower complaint that in July 2019 Trump had pressured Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky to investigate Joe and Hunter Biden in an attempt to gain an advantage in the 2020 presidential election. In December 2019, the House voted to impeach Trump for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, and the Senate acquitted him in February 2020. The second impeachment came after the January 6 Capitol attack, for which the House charged Trump with incitement of insurrection on January 13, 2021. 7 Republican senators voted for conviction, and finally Trump left the office on January 2021.